How far would you go to help someone you don't know? Would you risk your life? When young 19-year-old Melissa Ann Witt vanishes in 1994 and is then found murdered, her case goes cold. She is looking for justice. She is looking to find just one person who cares enough to help find her killer and solve her case. She has found such a champion. For the last 7 years, one woman has taken on this case and has vowed to find the killer of Melissa Ann Witt. Through various death threats and threats of bodily harm that she still receives to this day, nothing has deterred her from her mission. How far would you go to help someone you don't know? Join me as I talk to author and investigator LaDonna Humphrey on this episode of True Crime and Authors.
Welcome to True Crime and Authors Podcast, where we bring two passions together. The show that gives new meaning to the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. Here's your host, David McClam.
What's going on, everybody? This is your man, of course, David McClam, and welcome to another episode of True Crime and Authors. If you haven't already, make sure you're following us on all of our social media outlets. That link is in the show notes. Very easy for you. One link to Linktree, and that'll give you access to every link that goes to the show. So if you've been following your calendars and your weeks with me here, you know that it is once again time to talk to another author, and I am very excited to speak to this one. So let me tell you a little bit about who we're talking with today. She is a writer, documentarian, investigative journalist, a private investigator, and an advocate for victims of crime. And for the past 7 years, she has found herself passionately entangled in seeking justice for 19-year-old murder victim Melissa Ann Witt. She lives in Cave Springs, Arkansas, with her husband and 5 of her 7 children. And she is the author of The Girl I Never Knew Who Killed Melissa Witt. Let's all welcome LaDonna Humphrey. LaDonna, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. I'm also equally as excited to talk to you about this book that you have written that I'm sure has turned up the true crime world. Just to give you a little stat, you are the second author now that I've talked to that actually fits both bills of my show, the true crime and the author portion. I did recently talk to Jamie Gehring, who wrote Madman in the Woods, which chronicles her life next door to Ted Kaczynski.
Oh, wow. I've got to read that.
So that one is a good one. So let's talk a little bit about The Girl I Never Knew. So I know for a fact, because I read the book, we just want to clarify for the audience, you never knew a Melissa Witt, correct?
I did not. I didn't know Melissa. We had some mutual friends in common, but as far as us ever meeting, no, that never happened.
So if my math is right, her case is about 27 years old now, which means when you started this, it was about 20 years in. Why did you pick this particular case?
So a little bit of backstory. I had been a part of a nonprofit that I helped to found. It was called Let's Bring Them Home. And we provided services to families that had missing loved ones. And we did some really good work for about a decade and a half. And then we saw the rise of a government database called NamUs. And NamUs was able to do what we were doing, but do it better. And it was funded by the federal government. So long story short, it was time for us to say goodbye to our nonprofit, but we wanted to close it out strong. And so many of us had a journalism background, and we thought the best thing that we could do is to put together a documentary. So we got together, there were 11 of us, and people kept bringing up the Melissa Witt case. And I would argue against it. I would say, no, they recovered her body 45 days after she went missing. This does not fit our criteria. They outvoted me. And we made an appointment with the chief of police, and I went to go meet with investigators, and I just saw the passion that they had for the case. And so it's really ironic because I was the one who was so outspoken about not taking on Melissa's case. And then now it's kind of flipped to I'm the most outspoken advocate that she has. And so definitely like a destiny type situation, I think. It's one of those once in a lifetime situations. I know this is the work that I'm supposed to do. But that's really how it got started.
So to be honest with you, I didn't know a whole lot about Melissa Witt's case. I do true crime because I feel like there's cases that nobody knows about, and there's cases that we should never forget. That's the whole reason I do this. And now that you were outvoted and you did the case on those parameters, are you glad that you were outvoted?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's been life-changing for me, So I go and I meet with investigators, and they had worked with us before with our nonprofit. They had all the retired detectives in the room that had ever worked our case. The passion that was in that room was just amazing. And then about a month later, a couple of the retired detectives actually took me out to the location where Melissa's body was recovered. And that was life-changing for me. I knew then as a mom and as a woman and as an advocate that I had to do something. And so I wouldn't change anything about it. I wish I could have gotten involved sooner, honestly. But it's, again, I think I said it before, it's one of those cases that you're going to chase. It's once in a lifetime because you're just determined to see justice happen. And so I believe that fate weaved it all together. And so I'm proud to do the work that I'm doing on her behalf.
So I don't know if anybody else out there has read the book, but I know when I read the book, the moment that you did talk about going to the site where they found her, I could feel a switch in you just from you telling the story I was like, I bet this is when she really, not like you wasn't in it before, but this is when you really hunker down because now you're standing there. And I think, is it overwhelmingly different hearing it and then just standing there and saying, this is exactly where she was at?
Absolutely. It's definitely two different scenarios. So, being out there and realizing you're on this remote mountaintop, it's really hard to get to, and just kind of taking in what happened. They just left her there. Like she didn't matter to anybody. They took everything from her and they took her life. And it was just, I was incensed. I can't even think about it now without getting upset because the person that killed her left her there like she didn't mean anything. And that I think is life changing. And I made a vow that day that I was going to get justice, but I also made a vow I was going to find who did it. And that has kind of shaped the course of my life ever since.
Now, there was a quote that I found that you had stated. It said, I envision him a shadow-like figure, dark and dreadful, his confidence anchored in the predictability of a murder case slowly growing cold. Am I obsessed? Probably, but someone needs to play the role of tireless advocate for Melissa. Over the last 7 years that you've done this, have you learned more about this case than you thought that you would? And have you truly found out that nobody at all was advocating for her before you came along?
I think that we've learned a lot. That's like a two-part question. So we have learned a lot. We've brought in new information. We brought in new leads. We've developed new information about suspects, new suspects. So the work has been fruitful. I'm grateful for that because, law enforcement will tell you that they have more information now than they ever did. And that's a team effort. That's because we work together. And it's not just me, it's not just them. It's been a joint effort in her case. And that's been amazing, to kind of watch unfold. And I think that there have always been advocates for Melissa, but there's different kinds of advocates. It's law enforcement. They have the job to find the killer, and it's a case, and they have hundreds of other cases. And so they're not necessarily emotionally attached to the case. You've got family and friends that loved Melissa some are paralyzed with pain and they're not able to do anything like on this level. I think everybody has their own role and the way that they advocate is different. Some of it is just keeping Melissa alive in their heart and their mind. And so for me, it's a little different because I'm going to get out there and I'm going to be the one to say, hey, I want to address the killer and tell you that we're not going to stop until we find you. And so I think that mine has just been a more aggressive role. I think all of us together sort of make a great team, how it all kind of plays out together.
Now, I know you've had some scary moments while investigating this case over the years. Would you care to share any of those with us?
Yeah, sure. I write about several in the book. One particular incident happened at a grocery store, and I was approached by a man who had been following us for a couple hours. I was with my children. I have 2 grown children and then 5 small children. In fact, one of the children was a baby in a baby carrier at the time. And the man approaches us. It's pretty scary. At first I'm offended because I don't want to talk about the Witt case in front of my children.
Right.
I'm a mom first and foremost. But it became pretty fearful for me when I realized that there are people out there that know who I am, that are watching me work the case, and that they have the courage to approach me like that in a grocery store. And he was pretty aggressive. He threw some Mickey Mouse watches into my cart and he ran away. I knew then that we had to take different security measures for my family. It took me a while to get through that, but I've pressed on. Now, that's just one example of some of the pretty frightening things that happen. And I think it's not just the Witt case. I think anybody that gets this involved in a murder investigation, you're going to take that chance that you're going to have these kind of things happen.
You kind of remind me a lot of Paul Holes. He's also an investigator here in California, the police force. But he's supposed to be retired. But what I've come to find out is that a lot of folks like yourself who are investigators who get into a case, you're supposed to retire, you really never do. And in his case, he was supposed to be retiring, but then he got onto the trail of the Golden State Killer, which he eventually caught. That dedication comes with a price. And it comes at a price of family. He says he's been divorced several times, comes at a price of not being able to spend time with your kids. Has this cost you a price, and how does your family handle it?
It is costly. It is costly. It's cost me my personal privacy. I quickly became a public figure, especially after the book was released. And that's kind of hard because people will say and do anything on the internet. You've got keyboard warriors that want to pick everything apart. That's been hard. The attention that I've drawn from people who are frightening, either they're in prison or they're convicted murderers, rapists, those kind of things, that's been hard. And my marriage is strong. My husband is very supportive of what I do, and he knows I have to do it. This is what drives me. But it's cost us time together, and it's created some situations with my family that have been fearful. And I do have some regrets about that. You know, one of the things I try to tell people when I do speak, if I'll go speak in person or on a podcast, is that I really encourage people to take pause before you put your name and your face behind a cold case. If that's really what you want to do, then you need to understand what comes with that. And, you know, that's what's happened to us. We've had people show up at my home, my work, those sorts of things. And so I don't regret it. I just want my children and my family to be safe.
Yeah, I do know throughout the book, you talk about strange people has emailed you, people show up to your house. You had no idea how they got your personal information. When you read these books, I'm scared for you because I know that behind this, at the other end, there is a real person. Being a father of 6, grandfather of 7, I have a wife floating around here. I have 2 kids home left. When I read these books, I put myself in your shoes and was like, I talked to my wife and said, how would you feel if I did this? Would you be able to handle it? And, you know, she said, I'll be able to handle it. But once the threats start coming in, I don't know. And you had some very scary people writing to you. Have you got that kind of like resolved? Does it still happen?
No, it's not resolved. There's some pretty significant things that have been happening in my life as a result of the book and some things that I wrote about in the book and some tips that came in. And I lose some sleep about that. My husband has to see me sometimes break down because I am fearful at times. Every noise I hear in the middle of the night, of course, I'm waking him up. That it costs you your peace. But I know that if it was my daughter, that I would want someone to advocate for her if I couldn't do it for her. And I just believe that Melissa deserves this. And so my husband said something to me that was very profound, and he's reminded me of this more than once. It's that, LaDonna, you're already out there. You've already done it. And I understand that you're afraid and that it's drawn this attention, but it doesn't make any sense to back out now because they already know who you are. And it's probably better to just to trudge forward and to keep fighting and to show that courage, because that's going to be frightening to them. And so that's the stance that I'm taking, is that someone took her life. You're not going to bully me to get me to quit. And we'll just take the precautions that we need to keep our family safe.
So at any given time, have you or your investigative partners felt like either you knew who he was, who killed Melissa Witt, or that you were on the trail of the person?
I think that I have been in communication with Melissa's killer. Absolutely, I have. I believe we're hot and heavy on his trail, and I really believe that, love or hate the book, people are going to love it or hate it, that the information that's coming from that will help solve the case eventually. The phones are ringing on our hotline. They're ringing at the PD in Fort Smith, and it's just getting us closer. And we've got even more information that's come in. And so, we're close. We're very close. And I do believe that we know who killed her.
Here at True Crime and Authors, I read a lot of books. Every author that you've heard me interview and everyone that you will hear me interview, I've either read one of their books or I'm in the process of reading one. So how do I keep up with all of the books that I read? Well, that is where the show's sponsor, Catch Creations 614, comes into play. Catch Creations makes digital handmade planners and journals, and for those who want something on paper, printables as well. She can make anything from My Little Pony to Black Panther, anything that you can creatively think of, Catch Creations 614 can get it done. With excellent customer service and excellent communication, the owner, Kristen, will make sure that your journal comes out right and perfect the first time. And for those who are listeners of this show, you will get a special 10% discount when you use the code TrueCrime10. Catch Creations, best handmade planners, journals, and printables in the business. Check it out now. Now, I'll tell you who I thought that it was. I'm actually going to read it to you. It's a little long, but okay. I want the audience to feel this. I'm not reading the whole thing. So if you guys want to hear the whole entire letter from this person, you have to go out and get LaDonna's book. It's at the very end, is in the epilogue of that. So I'll read this to you, and then I'll tell you why I felt like it was this person. It says, before I go, I want to tell you this. I think the person who killed Melissa Witt was someone looking for the sexual thrill of dominating and killing a young woman. Often, though, the gender of the victim doesn't even matter quite as much. Any sexual thrill a sadistic person like this gets is likely from the act of dominating and killing. It is not based on what gender they happen to be, but anyone can have preferences, it's true. I suspect that it was someone that knew Melissa Witt far more than she knew them. Someone who appeared kind and, most importantly, unassuming. The nature of the crime would rule out it being a crime of passion or opportunity, mainly because this person appears to have thought this all through. Perhaps they knew her well enough to get her to trust them in a moment of need, a car ride, for example, or something to that effect, and that's when they killed her. This type of person would likely be someone that had a desire to hurt and kill from a very young age. They probably would be the type to think about these things a lot, read comics and books that featured a pretty intense level of violence, and who might have written stories for themselves or did other creative things to get their fantasies out. Usually these things start out as a fantasy, and as the person gets older, these fantasies start to take on a sexual leaning. They want more and yearn for more. Their fantasies get more and more intense until the fantasy aspect is no longer appealing and they want the real thing. And then boom, they kill someone like the beautiful young Melissa Witt. But here's the most important question to ask yourself as you seek justice for Melissa Witt. And you do want justice, don't you, Miss Humphrey? If so, I think you have to ask yourself these questions. Was this his first effort at taking a life, or was this part of a longer series of murders? Just how far are you willing to go to find out the truth? Will fear paralyze you, or will you charge on towards justice despite the terrifying realities of what you may face? Whatever will you do, Miss Humphrey? I almost can't wait to find out. Have a nice evening, and please, whatever you do, try to stay safe. The Vermilion Strangler. That still gives me chills just to read that. So I may be off, but when I read that, I was like, what if this is the guy? Because the details that he was giving in this, I'm like, this is just too overly detailed for you to have nothing to do with this at all. What was your thought when you read that?
Frightened. I felt the same way that you're describing. There was a lot of detail there. There's some back history with the Vermilion Strangler. I write a little bit about in the book about a lead that we follow that is in the death fetish community.
Mm-hmm.
And the Vermilion Strangler was actually part of that community. And we've spent a year, a team member and I, working undercover and in the death fetish community online to get some answers in the Witt case. And it's been frightening because you're looking at a subset of people who glorify the murder of women. And many of them are talking about the Witt case. It's chilling. It still gives me chills. And you asked me earlier, what are some of the scary things that have happened? Working undercover in the death fetish community, I was actually doxxed in the community. They gave out my information, my home address. It was one of the most frightening experiences that I've ever had in my life. And I think that there's something to that community and real murder.
Yeah, I was scared for you because I knew you was doxxed. I think that's even in the book because they were digging really hard to find out who you were. It's like this community, they saw somebody who was new and instantaneously they were, okay, why is this person even here? Is this person really a part of our community? And they just set out to find out anything they could about you. And then when they finally found out, they dox you, which nobody knows what that means. That's when they actually give out your real life statistics, whatever that may be, home address, phone number, things of that nature. What did that do to you? Did you have nightmares after? Because some of the stuff that you was writing about after you going undercover, I didn't even know that this community existed. And I asked my wife if she knew. She goes, she's never heard of that one before. And you do give caution. So people, I'm going to say this because she said in the book, do not go out and try to search for this. It is real. You don't want to be a part of it. But you give that caution in the book. Don't try to find this stuff out. And you were very careful of trying not to mention where to find this community at. What did that do to you psychologically for a while after that?
I still am struggling. I see a therapist regularly because of the things that I've seen and read in that community, because of the threats that they've made on my life. It's something that, I think my demeanor's changed a little bit because I start to get tense when I think about it. Because one of the things that we realized is that even if that community doesn't have anything to do with the murder of Melissa Witt, there is a great chance that there's a subset of that community that they're out killing real people. And some of these movies, you can't tell if it's real or if it's simulated murder and acts of necrophilia. It's frightening. It is frightening. And so there's a lot of nightmares. It's led me to crusade against that community. And they doxed me. And so I'm going to do the next best thing. And I wrote a book about him. And so that book's coming out soon. And I think that people need to know that there's this dark little shanty, seedy community that exists on the internet that wants to murder our daughters, our mothers, our sisters, our friends, women in general. And there's a really fine line between fantasy and reality. And so I definitely want people to be aware of it. And I want people to understand that it's happening in their own backyard. And I want people to take a stand and link arms and say, we're not going to allow this to happen anymore. And the best thing that I can do with that fear that I have is I'm turning that into advocacy as well. Not one more girl. That's my mantra.
What do you think the reaction from that community is going to be once you release this new book? Are you fearful that they may try to come after you again? The threats may heighten?
Yes, I'm afraid of that. They do know the book is coming. Is it okay if I mention what the name of the book is?
Absolutely. We would get that anyways.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. The book is called Strangled, and it's the answer to the epilogue in The Girl I Never Knew. And it's all about the community. And so we did make a soft launch on social media about that book. And immediately members of the death fetish community got a hold of me. They're going to burn my house down. They're going to kill my kids. We're going to be sold into trafficking and all of those things. And it's a lot of scary things, but you have to remember a lot of it's keyboard warriors, right? They're hiding in their mom's basement that they probably never left. There is some of that. The FBI is involved. Reports have been made. And I think the best thing that I can do is just to fight fire with fire and just to keep going at them. there's a lot that we're going to do to stand against the death fetish community, because many of these movies, they are so similar to Melissa Witt's murder. So I have to believe that somebody has an answer in that community about what happened to her. And so I'm going to keep pushing forward. But unfortunately, they know who I am, but I know who they are now too. I have the ability to find out who is behind a screen name just like they can. So
Is the overall feeling is that Melissa fell victim to somebody from that community?
I think there's a great possibility. I really do. I think that in Strangled, I co-wrote the book with a woman named Alicia Lockhart, and we give a lot of statistical information about violent pornography and real crime. And those two do go hand in hand. And so I think there's a great probability. Do I think that she was actually placed in like a movie or a snuff film? No, I don't think that. But I do think that there's a great possibility that someone that was involved in those types of activities killed her, and that they had lived a fantasy for so long that they finally acted on it. I think that's a great reality.
For the young women out there that is partaking in this lifestyle I'm going to mention, and I'm bringing this up because I have you on the show and you are an advocate for women and you've seen more things than I have. What do you say to young women who are Melissa's age, even a little younger, because unfortunately this does happen, even women in their 20s and 30s, about getting into pornography? Because from what I've seen and heard, some of these women that ends up in the death fetish community comes by that way.
They do. And so my day job is I'm a director for a sober living community. So I help women in recovering from drugs and alcohol. And so I know that lifestyle leads to decisions that you often wouldn't make otherwise, right? Because you need money to live for your rent, but you need money for drugs and alcohol. And a lot of these girls that are acting out in these films are doing it out of desperation, or they've been wooed into it by these producers who pretend to care about them and invest in them. And they start out slowly. It's not just all of a sudden a death fetish film. It's just they ease their way into it. And so really, I think what I encourage young women to do is to obviously stay sober. That's hugely important. And to look for ways to be connected in your community with people who are going to give you opportunities that are not secretive. That's the key word. Because when you start dealing in secrets, especially a young woman who may be flattered by a man who's trying to woo her into something, those secrets often lead to addiction, human trafficking, forced sex, and murder. And there's going to be a lot of advocacy that people are going to see stem from my team and from me personally because of what we've learned. And it really goes hand in hand with the work that I'm doing anyway as a sober living director. And I have some of that firsthand knowledge of what women, and it's not just women, but what men and women do in their addiction. And they just get involved in things that are they're taken advantage of, and it's frightening. It's really scary. And death fetish is illegal in most states. And I think if people would just understand that and they can learn about it, we can put a stop to it. But you can't stop what you don't know about. And so that's why I think it's important for me to talk about it and to write about it and to do what I can to make sure these people are held accountable.
So let's talk a little bit about the advocacy side. I know because of this now, there is a Facebook page that I follow called Who Killed Missy Wit. I'm assuming that you and your team is behind this page. Tell the audience a little bit about the Missy Witt Facebook page and what they can find there and things of that nature.
Sure. So we started the Witt page in October of 2015, just as a means to gather information for the documentary that we were working on. And it really just took off. People in the community really were standing with us and wanted to give us information. And I think that they were so grateful and hungry for information about the Witt case because, this was a 90s case, 1994. So there wasn't a lot on the internet. And basically anything you can find on the internet now about the Witt case is from our team because we've put it there. We've been strategic. And, that we've watched that group grow from a few hundred people to just almost 14,000 people now that care about the case. We post all kinds of things. We ask questions that we want people to answer about Melissa or the community or suspects that we're looking at, if we can release the information to the public. We want to make sure that we're providing accurate information about Melissa's case to the community, because in a lot of cold cases, you'll see misinformation. It just runs amok. And so we wanted to make sure that we put a stop to that in Melissa's case. You'll see information about the book, the documentary, but a lot of discussion with the community and all of the people that are on the Facebook page, just to get their thoughts and ask them to share the information. And it's been really successful. It's been a huge tool, and I'm really grateful. At this point, we've had millions and millions of shares of the information. And I believe that's why it's been such a critical tool to law enforcement, because it's brought in new information for them to look at, new leads.
So now on top of that, you are now in the throes of releasing Uneven Ground, the Melissa Witt story, which is you guys' new documentary. Is there anything you can tell us about that? I do know on the site that they had posted looking for people that wants to volunteer to come and watch it live on a Sunday here coming up soon. Anything you can tell us about Uneven Ground?
Uneven Ground tells more of Melissa's story, I think, more than the book does. The book is more of my perspective from working the Witt case. The documentary is more of who Melissa is, what happened to her, and we introduce some of the suspects. And so it's not like you're going to get all the same information that you got from the book. There's some different things there. Pretty straightforward. And we want to get it out there because not everybody's going to pick up a book and read it. We live in a society of instant gratification. They would prefer to watch a documentary or listen to a podcast. So we want to take advantage of those things. So I'm excited. We've got quite a few people that have signed up for the Sunday event. It looks like we're going to have to set up a few more events, but we want people to view it and tell us what they think. And we really want to know what other information do you want to know about the case? We want the community, especially the Fort Smith community, to feel like that this was their project too, because we want to honor Melissa's life. My friend from True Crime Garage, his name is Nick Edwards. We're pretty good friends. And he said something to me that was so profound that I tend to want to repeat that, because he remarked that Melissa's murder was a very small part of her life. And I'd never thought of it that way, but he's right, because there was so much more to her than what happened to her that day. And we want to accomplish that with the documentary as well, is for people to remember that this was this beautiful, young, vibrant girl. She's much more than just a murder case.
And I definitely agree. I'm grateful for this book because I feel like that I got to know Melissa outside of the murder. And he's right. This is a very small part. Even though she's only here for 19 years, there's so much to her. She was a very smart, beautiful girl. She was into everything teenage girls is into. But that's why I like your book so much, because you did take time to hone in on that. A lot of books I read that deals with cases like this, they give you maybe this much, just a little bit of that person. And then we're talking about the murder as if that was their whole existence. So you do that very well in this book. So I'm very happy for that.
Thank you. I want people to remember Melissa fondly. It's a tragedy that her life was taken. It really was. And that's why I refuse to talk about gruesome details about the murder. I don't show crime scene photos. I'm not going to talk about crime scene photos, because that's not who she was. And that's not going to honor her or her memory. And it's not going to honor her friends or her family. And I think that was part of the motivation with the book, is to show that you can write a true crime book that's not gory, but that can be so filled with passion and intrigue that maybe other people want to know about the case.
So what is your relationship like with Melissa's family? How do they feel about all of this?
So her parents are deceased. Both of her parents are deceased. She's got some distant relatives that have shown some support. They've come to some book signings. They have the books. They're very supportive. And then she's got some other family members that I think they're unsure of how to feel, mainly because this does dredge up pain for them. We have to remember this was really somebody's family member that was murdered. And I try to be respectful of that and stay within the bounds of using that word, wanting to honor her family. the best that I can. And there have been many times that I've asked the retired detectives and the current detectives and the chief of police, do you want me to continue? Is this something that I should stop doing? And the answer is always, you have to continue. If you don't do this, who's going to do it? And I think that's the right thing to do. So her family's never asked me to stop, but I think that there are family members that it brings pain for them to relive the case details. So
Now, for most of the authors I've spoke to, you're on the opposite end of the spectrum, meaning that most of them are indie published. I do know that you are published by Genius Books. I've had the honor and pleasure of speaking with Stephen. So I'll ask you this question. Being that you have a publisher, a lot of the indie publishers said they didn't want a publisher because they felt like their work would be hindered. How is it working with Genius Books? Do you feel like they let you be completely who you wanted to be, or were they trying to put you in a frame?
I've had somebody else ask me that question, and they have been amazing. I was very scared to write the book. One, I have a journalism background, and I've written many things over the years. I'd just never written a book. So I had some fear about putting this pen to paper and writing about Melissa. And I was really specific about how I wanted the story told. And they allowed me to do it. They didn't push me for more details than I was willing to give. They didn't push me to be somebody who I wasn't. They've been very supportive. Which has been good. And I'm gonna be honest. There have been a lot of criticism about the book. There will be people that are saying that I'm a narcissist and that I wrote about myself. That's been hard for me to digest. I think I was surprised that anybody would see it that way, because that's not what's happening here. This is me telling my version of events of what I've done to help solve Melissa's unsolved murder. But it's just part of it. So I tell you that because the publishing company has been so supportive of me from an emotional standpoint, and just linking arms with me and saying, no, this is why we published the book. This is the end goal. And so I've been very grateful for that. It's been a great experience, and I've signed with them for several more books. So if that tells you anything, it's a good partnership.
I'm glad. Yeah, speaking to Stephen was a very good experience. And the one thing I'll tell the audience is the publisher is just like a record company. If something bad goes on with something that they've produced, they also get the backlash. And I can only imagine the thing, you wrote some things in the book that's come about with you, things that people have said, the criticism of the book, and they're standing behind you. And I'm grateful because I looked through some of the other true crime books that's there, and some of those seems just about as raw as yours. So to me, that says you have a publisher that's behind you guys' work, that's not trying to put you in a box, that wants you to tell your story. And so I'm glad you're working with Genius Books. I hope a lot of other people from hearing this would think about signing with them.
I hope so too. They're a smaller company, but they're mighty. And they're really passionate about these cases. And it's just been an amazing experience for me. Stephen is amazing. I talk to him almost every day. Just a lot of support and encouragement. And how can I do this better? I'm always asking. So with the next book, what can I do? How can I make it better? And they're always looking for ways to help me with that. And it's a beautiful thing. And I do hope that they are able to take on more true crime writers, because there are other great stories out there. They just need to be told.
So usually I ask at this point, what's next for you? We already know. So do you know when Strangled will come out?
Yep, it's going to release on October 28th of this year. So we're just almost there. And it's been a long, hard year, because it's really hard to write and release a book. And The Girl I Never Knew was released in April. So that's still very new. And I'm still doing all the publicity for that and then working the leads for Melissa's case. But I was very adamant that we had to release Strangled before the end of the year. And they agreed with me, and I was grateful for that too. One, for my own safety, and for Alicia Lockhart, who's my co-author. We feel safer having the book out. Right. We feel safer being able to say, this is our truth, this is what happened to us, and this is what we're going to do about it. And we understand that's going to be a rocky journey, but it's one that we're willing to take. And then I've got other books that are coming out in 2023. So I'm excited about those too.
Let me say thank you to you. Thank you to Genius Books and NetGalley. That's how I found your book. It popped up on my feed because I like true crime books. And when I read it, first of all, the cover grabbed me because it's just out there. There's a picture of Melissa and it says the girl I never knew. And so my mind's like, how are you writing about a book about somebody you don't know? So let me see what this book's about. And when I read the synopsis, I'm like, why have I really ever heard of this case? Out of all the true crime podcasters and true crime people I follow on YouTube, why have they never done anything about this case? I got to read this book. So I put in my request to get it, and I was approved. When I was extremely happy, and I think I finished this book in about 2 days. It only took me that long because I had to work. So every time I went for lunch break, I'm eating in my car because I'm going where I have a lot of silence. I need to read this book. So thank you guys for making that possible. The one thing I do want to say to you, LaDonna, is it's hard. I know it's hard work. I know it comes at a cost. If we had more women like you that's advocating for women and for men and for all of these other families out there, regardless of race, color, gender, whatever is going on, maybe we would get some more of these cases solved. As you probably already know, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of missing children. A lot of them has been murdered. So I know it's scary. And from reading your book, I can feel it. Just reading that little bit I read from the Vermilion Strangler sends chills through my spine. But the one thing you have to always remember is no matter what anybody tells you, you're doing God's work. And this is what you're going to be remembered for. If nothing else stands out, which I know there's a lot of other things, but understand that you are writing your legacy now. And when that time comes, when we're all no longer here, this is the one thing that people is going to remember you for. And I know it's painful for Melissa's family, but I do believe in a lot of ways that they are grateful, at least knowing that somebody cares enough to want to make this public, to want to see if they can find who the killer is, even if it is causing them personally. So I do thank you for that.
Yeah, I'm very humbled by your words. Thank you for that. It's such an encouragement to me because you got me a little bit emotional here because I want people to see that you can stand up and advocate, that you can be brave and that you can go outside of your comfort zone and you can advocate in your own backyard for cases. Like you said, there are hundreds and hundreds of cases. And there's so many different ways that you can do that. Maybe it's just sharing a post on social media. Maybe it's inviting people to be on your podcast. There's 100 different things that you can do. And so it's really important to me. My life is finite. We're all only here for a very short amount of time. And I want to use my voice to make a difference. And so I really appreciate your kind words. Thank you.
Is there anything else that you would like to say to your readers and fans out there before we wrap it up?
I do. I really think that I want people to embrace that Melissa needs justice and that there's a team of people. It's not just me, but there's a team of people that I work with that are fighting hard to make that happen. And that's what the heart is behind this book and behind this series, is because this is a way to tell Melissa's story in a way that's never been told before. And so we just want people to join that. Just join the effort. We've got a hashtag. It's hashtag Justice for Melissa Witt. And we just want people to join us, whatever that looks like.
I hope today I've certainly done my part. This is the whole reason I wanted you on the show, so that we can get it out there. I always feel like the more ears, the better, and everybody can spread the word. So I'm very grateful that you chose to come on my show. When asked, you're the one author that I thought about immediately when I set out to do this. And what you're doing is one of the main reasons I said, this is a podcast I want to do, because I can get them on to talk about this and we can get people behind whatever they're trying to go through.
Thank you. You're doing good work. So keep it up. This is exciting. So I'm honored to be here and to know you. And I hope that we continue to work together.
We absolutely will. So when, maybe we have you back again to talk about Strangled. Anything you have coming down the pipeline, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always willing to read it. You have another support staff right here. So anything I can do for you, don't hesitate to drop me a line.
Awesome. Okay. I'll do that.
All right, LaDonna, I appreciate it. All right, guys, you just heard from LaDonna Humphrey, the author of The Girl I Never Knew, Who Killed Melissa Witt. Look, guys, she's doing some serious work out here. Just imagine if this was your daughter, would you want somebody like her to advocate for you? I think the answer would be yes. You can find the links in the show notes for the Who Killed Missy Wit Facebook page, as well as where you can find her books. You can get her book right now on Amazon. If you are a Kindle Unlimited reader, you can get that under your subscription. Read every page. LaDonna does not get paid for her work unless you read every page in that book. She gets paid by the page. You can also find her book on the Genius Books website, which I will have that linked below. So once again, we thank LaDonna. Let's help her in her cause to find the killer of Melissa Witt. All right, guys, I thank you for tuning in to this one. Once again, if you haven't already, follow us on social media. The Linktree link is in the show notes. This is the for sure way that you can keep up with myself, people like LaDonna, and every other author that I have talked to. Always be safe out there, guys. Take care of yourself and each other. And remember, this is the show that brings two passions into one. I'm going to catch you guys the next time.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Authors. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Join us on social media. On Facebook at True Crime and Authors. On Twitter at Authors True. On YouTube and TikTok at True Crime and Authors. And email at truecrimeandauthors@gmail.com. Cover art and logo designed by Dazzling_Ray from Fiverr. Sound mixing and editing by David McClam. Intro script by Sophie Wild from Fiverr. And I'm the voice guy, your imaging guy from Fiverr. See you next time on True Crime and Authors.